Welcome to Oakland University's virtual event series, OU Explorations. I'm Catherine Lehman, your moderator for this evening. Tonight, you will hear a presentation by Assistant Professor of Theater, David Graham, on the topic of serious laughter, contemporary farce in the 21st century, and also insights by Department Chair and Associate Professor Jeremy Barnett. Following the presentation, there will be a question and answer segment shared by David and Jeremy. To ask a question, use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. You can type your questions at any time and they'll be answered following the presentation. I would like to welcome our special guest, President Ora Hurst-Paskovitz, who is joining us tonight. Ora, we know you have many requests for your time, so we're honored that you're spending some of that time with us this evening. When we have a presentation with a guest speaker, there is a reminder that we give. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Oakland University. Oakland University fully supports the First Amendment. I believe we're ready to begin. I would like to introduce Assistant Professor David Graham, who will be presenting this evening. Originally from Toronto, Canada, David has been a professional theater and opera director, actor, dramaturg, and teacher for over 25 years. David teaches an array of directing and acting classes and has directed a wide range of plays and musicals, including Macbeth, The Who's Tommy, Hands on a Hard Body, and A Chorus Line. A champion of new work, he has collaborated with many original plays, musicals, and operas. Let's listen now to David Graham as he shares his thoughts on farce.
Good evening. My name is David Graham, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Theater. I teach courses in stage directing, acting, and script analysis. I also direct plays and musicals for the Department of Theater when we, of course, are not in the middle of a plague and can all safely share space with one another, which, fingers crossed, is the plan for this current academic year. Although the majority of my work lives and breathes in the rehearsal room and on stage, I have a number of theoretical research interests. They range from Shakespeare and his contemporaries to the work of German playwright Bertolt Brecht, from contemporary musical theater and opera to red-nosed clowning. Tonight, however, I am tickled to have the chance to regale and share with you my love and passion for the subgenre of comedy known as farce. Okay, this format makes it a little difficult to gauge your reactions, so my guess is one of the following things happened. 1, you turned off your computer and walked away. 2, you may have had one of the following knee-jerk reactions. I hate farce. God, it's so silly and stupid. People tripping over furniture, miscommunications, doors slamming, pants falling down. Or, I love farce. It's so silly and stupid. People tripping over furniture, miscommunications, doors slamming, pants falling down. I totally get it. It's a divisive subject, not unlike politics and mask mandates. The only difference is, assuming safety protocols are in place for all involved, no one will die performing or watching a farce. The truth is, broach the subject of farce as a form of theater and the response is either joyous enthusiasm or utter loathing. And I think that's because when it's done well, it is sheer theatrical bliss. When it's done poorly, it can be one of the most painful and excruciating things to sit through. Farce is extremely difficult to execute. It requires specificity, expert comic timing, clever writing, smart design choices, exemplary ensemble work amongst the actors, and stamina. Farce is a workout, but when it is firing on all cylinders, it produces a force of laughter that is so good for the system. And I love to laugh. I mean, really laugh. The kind of unbridled, uninhibited laugh that feels like an otherworldly experience. Your body shakes. Your chest contracts and tightens. Tears stream down your face. Catching your breath seems impossible. To put it bluntly, you feel as if you're never going to regain any control over your senses or bodily functions ever again. That's the kind of laugh I'm talking about. And in the last year and a half, that kind of laughter has been very hard to come by, which is why having the chance to talk about Farce brings a smile to my face. Farce, when it's done well, elicits that kind of response in me. There is nothing quite like sitting in a darkened theater with an audience of strangers, sharing a communal laugh at the expense of a group of people on stage who are fighting so hard for something, their rational selves all but disappear into the ether. A snowballing of circumstances force those characters in front of us to make ridiculous decision after ridiculous decision in order to win, hold on to, or protect their heart's desire or obsession, which inevitably gets them and the people around them into more and more trouble. As outside observers, we are given permission to laugh at the absurdity of these characters, the choices they're making, and the escalating situation in front of us. What is the cumulative effect of all these elements conspiring together? A wall of laughter is generated that is so visceral, so infectious, so thunderous. You think the paint is going to peel off the walls of the theater and the proscenium arch is going to crack open and rain down plaster on the actors, and possibly the audience too. And as long as that plaster doesn't fall on you, it's even funnier. Mel Brooks Mel Brooks, the award-winning director, actor, and writer of some of the funniest films ever put on screen, including Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, and Spaceballs, once said, "Tragedy is when I cut my finger. Comedy is when you fall into an open sewer and die." Well, this quote typifies the very nature of farce and the relationship that is established between what's happening on stage and what we're witnessing in the audience. When something awful happens to us that clearly causes unspeakable pain, it's not funny. However, there is a unique and unquestionable guilty enjoyment in seeing someone forced to survive a high-stakes situation and extract themselves from trouble or physical harm. I recognize that sounds very callous, but as someone who readily trips on sidewalks, bangs his head, and has been defecated on by flying geese, I know exactly what Brooks means. When these things happen and no one is around to witness them, I feel like an idiot, and yes, it is tragic, with me secretly cursing the day that sidewalk had the audacity to trip me up, or that cupboard decided to remain open when I lifted my head. On the other hand, when these perfectly timed pieces of pain and slapstick offer a friend or relative a front row seat and subsequently a hearty laugh at my expense, it's easy to see from their perspective where the mirth of the situation lies. So what constitutes farce? If a comedy offers us ridiculous characters in real circumstances, farce features real characters who have been thrust into an improbable and rapidly declining situation. Ask most people what constitutes farce or a farce, and I would hazard to say that many of the aforementioned things that people both love and hate about the form are on that list. Mistaken identity, miscommunications, verbal wit and wordplay, tons of physical comedy and slapstick, ridiculously complicated plots, two-dimensional characters, or half-naked people running in and out of rooms adopting ridiculous disguises and falling over furniture in a Herculean effort to avoid getting caught by an unsuspecting spouse. And yes, a lot of doors. Oh, hold that thought. Sorry. It's no wonder that the word farce derives from the old French word meaning to stuff. In the medieval times, short, comic interludes were often stuffed between serious pieces. So what is the crux of a good farce? Well, any good play poses the classic Passover question, why is this night different from all other nights? Something in the lives of the characters we're watching on stage is different from yesterday, and the day before, and so on. Different enough to create high drama and comedy. For farce to take off, the difference between this night or day and all other nights or days is that this is the absolute worst day or days in the protagonist's life. It must be for the piece to build, spiral out of control, and potentially result in tragedy. And lots of laughter. For the characters in a farce, the stakes are life and death. Everything moves with such speed that characters are given little opportunity to think through their choices. A great farce sees its characters constantly racing or pitted against time, forcing them to think on their feet. Whether it's accomplishing a task before someone returns or doing everything in their power to get rid of someone in order to buy time or hide the evidence. We should always be waiting for that metaphorical, or depending on the play, literal, bomb to go off. An effective farce will create a pressure cooker situation for its characters. We love watching characters under pressure. And in a farce, when the vice tightens and the threat of being caught or losing out on something looms large, that's when characters will persist in their actions in order to survive their circumstances. Lies are told, disguises are donned, and actions are taken that in any normal situation would probably land someone in jail. But in a farce, are part and parcel with the genre's stylistic allowances. Now, when one thinks of classic or popular farces for the stage, they may offer up the Roman plays of Plautus, whose work subsequently served as the inspiration for later farces like Shakespeare's The Comedy of Errors and the Stephen Sondheim musical A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. You might have the 17th century farces, social farces of Molière, like Tartuffe or The Imaginary Invalid. Italian playwright Carlo Goldoni's The Servant of Two Masters, which the Department of Theatre produced last spring, inspired British playwright Richard Bean's brilliant adaptation One Man, Two Governors, which premiered in 2011. Gogol's The Government Inspector, the 19th century domestic farces of French playwright Georges Feydeau, like A Flea in Her Ear, Brandon Thomas's enduring Charlie's Aunt, and Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest. These are all pre-20th century farces. For more subversive and darker fare, we might whet our comedic palate with the farces of British playwright Joe Orton, who wrote Loot and What the Butler Saw, or the political farces of Nobel Prize winner Dario Fo, like Accidental Death of an Anarchist, or Can't Pay, Won't Pay. Of course, I could list many more. Some of them you may have heard of, some of them you might just be shaking your head going, I don't know what you're talking about, David. But I think we can all agree that one of the most discussed farces, one of the most popular farces that comes up whenever the word farce is mentioned is Michael Frayn's 1982 backstage comedy, Noises Off, which many consider, including myself, one of the great farces of all time. But what constitutes contemporary farce? For timeline purposes, I like to think of contemporary farces premiering after 2000. On a more philosophical note, and don't get me wrong, laughter is still a prime intent, I would add the qualifying word serious to laughter. Farces of the 21st century are filled with serious laughter. One of my mentors used to define farce as the single-minded pursuit of a singular objective. Think of a horse race and the blinders that the horses wear. It keeps them focused on the prize, on the finish line. In farce, the characters also have blinders on, and because of this, they have no peripheral vision, and that is when they miss what's coming at them. That's when they fall over things or make those irrational choices in the moment, because they have no sense of the bigger picture around them. Things are coming at them in front of them because they have those blinders on. Their goal is to persist no matter what happens in service to their obsession or desire. It must be noted, too, that in farces, characters very rarely change. Because farces are so plot-heavy and move fast, we simply do not have the time for a lot of character development. Their objective is to survive, to live to see another day. In many classic or popular farces, a character's obsession or desire is another person. For a long time, one could associate the word naughty with a typical farce. But it seems nowadays playwrights have more on their minds than titillating audiences with thwarted acts of hanky-panky. Surveying the changing face of farce in the 21st century, both here at home and abroad, I would like to propose 6 subcategories of the genre, or what I affectionately like to refer to as the 6 doors of contemporary farce. The first door is domestic farce. Domestic farce, often taking place within a home setting, Domestic farces expose the unhappiness of one or more parts of the household. Characters in a domestic farce are no longer satisfied or come to realize that all is not well with their ordered and operational home life. As characters are introduced to us in a domestic farce, we quickly become aware that the sheen underneath the well-polished silver is quite tarnished. These characters are looking for love, acceptance, respect, and a sense of belonging, and sometimes sex. Things they are not getting from their loved ones or families. Subsequently, we find them consciously or unconsciously searching beyond the familial status quo for excitement, change, or contentment. Perhaps to rediscover or relive a time when they had more control over who they were and what they wanted from life. Examples of contemporary domestic farce include French playwright Yasmina Reza's God of Carnage, or the popular plays of American playwright Ken Ludwig, like Lend Me a Tenor or The Fox on the Fairway. Door number 2 introduces us to sociocultural farce. Sociocultural farces thrust their characters into increasingly heightened and provocative situations that force them to confront their social biases when it comes to issues of class, identity, gender, sexuality, and race. Farce can point out character fragility and narrow-mindedness, highlighting absurd points of view that are born out of social constructs. The action that rears its head in these socially pointed plays borders on grotesquerie, and when executed effectively, not only make us laugh, but oftentimes make us uncomfortable as well, and thus forcing us to take a good, hard look at the thematic ideas being interrogated. 2 examples of contemporary sociocultural farces that examine issues of race and cultural identity include Yellowface by American playwright David Henry Hwang and Black is the New White by Aboriginal playwright Nakia Louie. The third door introduces us to political farce. Contemporary political farce revolves around those who hold positions of power and the lengths they will go to in order to uphold or reject institutional or government policy and legislation. The range of characters that color contemporary political farce run the gamut from civil servants to those who have been elected into or have inherited positions of power. Example, presidents, prime ministers, governors, city council members, chairpersons, royalty. There is a strong point of view on the playwright's part to address the corruption of these political systems at the local, national, or global level. These farces strive to expose government hypocrisy and highlight the consequences that result when those in power abuse it. David Mamet's play November is a satirical farce that focuses on an incompetent president who will do anything in his executive power to get re-elected. In certain plays, the long arm of political farce draws attention to capitalism and the precariousness of economics, the red tape of educational systems, issues pertaining to the environment, and the horrors of terrorism. These farces find their outrageous and sometimes shocking humor when one or more characters' political agenda motivates their sense of survival. Examples of these farces include Martin McDonagh's bloody, dark farce about the IRA, The Lieutenant of Inishmore, or Christopher Durang's Why Torture is Wrong and the People Who Love Them. Our fourth door introduces us to historical farce. Historical farce invites us to enter into the distant past. Unlike social and political farces, which have their eyes trained on the immediacy of the moment and are consciously set in the present day, historical farce allows the audience to view the play through the lens of a different era. Historical farce allows us to reflect on and laugh at the absurdity of our own world through the lens of the past. In some ways, distancing the story can be an illuminating way to consider our current times with a fresh perspective. Historical farce often has strong social or political undertones. The key is the time period and its anthropological systems that define the rules that govern the world of the play. Understanding these systems, the political, economic, social, and cultural, inevitably guide and drive character behavior in very specific ways. Farce is mined from the play's historical context. An example of contemporary historical farce, which when you say it out loud sounds a bit like an oxymoron, would be Nell Benjamin's Victorian set farce, The Explorers Club, which focuses on a brilliant explorer who has discovered a new civilization of people, but faces exclusion from a prestigious all-male club because of her gender. The 21st century has seen an explosion of farces that have been drawn from other source material, and I have referred to these farces as remixed farces. These farces have been adapted from novels, movies, and classical plays, and have been reconfigured for the contemporary stage. The recognition factor of the source material often plays a role in generating laughs, and pleasure is had based on how the playwright celebrates or subverts the work they are adapting or creating. There's often a self-conscious metatheatrical quality to the presentation, displaying performance virtuosity. Recent examples of remixed farces include The 39 Steps, based on the John Buchan novel and Alfred Hitchcock movie, Baskerville by Ken Ludwig, based on the Sherlock Holmes mystery The Hound of the Baskervilles, and the musical The Producers, based on the Mel Brooks movie, The Producers. Finally, behind our last door, we have metafarce. These farces are set within a theatrical milieu and are often about the crazy, zany world of theater people and the challenges and obstacles that present themselves when producing or performing a play, like Noises Off. Oftentimes, we watch the play's performance fall apart in front of us due to actor mishaps, design malfunctions, or backstage drama that threaten to thwart the onstage work. Some popular metafarces include the work of Mischief Theater and their Goes Wrong series of hilarious plays, The Play That Goes Wrong, Peter Pan Goes Wrong, The Nativity Goes Wrong. In Sarah Ruhl's play Stage Kiss, we see an offstage romance start to mirror the fractured one being rehearsed on stage, with the lines of reality and fantasy becoming blurred. This brief little introduction is designed to give you some background and insight into a genre I adore, and unfortunately, which is often dismissed. And maybe it provides you a new lens in which to view the form the next time you go to the theater. Like all theater, though, farce holds up the proverbial mirror to life and uses comedy to point out our own foibles and follies. Consider for a moment an awkward or uncomfortable situation you found yourself in, and reflect upon how you survived it, or at least extracted yourself from it. The date from hell, that text message you accidentally sent to the wrong person, or that time you had to go to the bathroom during a presentation. We all find ourselves in potentially farcical situations every day. I'm sure you have done things that you're not proud of in order to protect your dignity and retain some sense of self-respect. Perhaps you succeeded. Perhaps you utterly failed. But in the moment, you used logic and reasoning that made the most sense to you in order to persist and survive the situation, no matter how ridiculous or irrational it might appear to one on the outside. You played an action that matched the truth and reality of your given situation. That's what characters in a farce do as well. Now, for dramatic effect, farce will distort the situation a little more, squeeze more complications into the plot, pepper the proceedings with an eclectic ensemble of characters, add the time pressure, raise the stakes, and ramp up the passion. But when all is said and done, though, farce is a mere laugh or two removed from our own lives. I want to thank you all for your time tonight and indulging me in my passion for farce. I believe I'll be seeing you live in just a couple of moments.
Very nice. That was so informative and fun. I really learned a lot from that. Now I would like to introduce Jeremy Barnett, Chair of the Department of Theater and Associate Professor of Theater Scenic Design, who will join David in a dialogue on tonight's subject. Jeremy and David, are you with me?
We are.
Hi.
Great, welcome. Get away.
David, that was really great. I I love listening to you talk about your work, and I have for a very long time. The audience doesn't necessarily know this, but the first time you and I worked together was it back in grad school, and it was in fact on a farce. It was Joe Orton's What the Butler Saw. Um, so this has been a part of your life and your academic study for a really long time. Can you tell us what drew you to the form way back then, and how has your understanding changed since then?
Yeah. So it's a good question. Thank you, Jeremy. So, I have always loved comedy. There's something about it right from a young age. I think I was blessed to have a dad who loved language and wordplay, and I was introduced to like classic clowns and comedians of the screen, particularly the Marx Brothers and Laurel and Hardy and Chaplin from a very young age. I'm a big clown. I'm a clown, but I also love clowning, and I think that the mode of performance has carried over to a lot of the work that I've done. So, as far as farce goes, I think that I'm drawn to the chaos that comes out of the structure of farce. And while I was in grad school, I finally got an opportunity to explore a lot of different plays, different types of comedies, but I found myself doing a lot of farce. I did a Dario Fo play called The Virtuous Burglar. I did directed Moliere's Tartuffe. My graduate work was in directing. That's just for everyone. I did Waiting for Godot or Godot. So there's an aspect of farce in Beckett. Beckett was very much influenced by the silent film and the comedians of the 20s and 30s, and vaudeville. I've always been attracted to vaudeville, and then we did What the Butler Saw, and there's something I think I'm drawn to as part of the chaos, the taboos that are associated with farce. It's a hard genre to do well, and I know I mentioned it in the talk. It's one when I have mentioned it to people. You say farce, and I think people just have polar responses to it. And the truth is that it's hard to do. It's hard to do well, and it requires. I think that's the other thing, is that it requires everyone involved to be at the top of their game, and it's very rarely about a star vehicle. There are shows that that have that, but it really requires the writing, the performance, the design, everything to come together and to execute this very. It can be very delicate. You go one way and you start to see ham acting or schmacting, as we like to call it, or you see pieces or comedies that don't go far enough, and then it's not funny. And so I think there's a challenge there. I like using the word virtuosity. Farce demands virtuosity, and I think I'm drawn to that. And it's funny when it's done well. It's funny. There you can feel it, especially being in the audience of a farce. It's the rolling laughter that you get, and it's great to be kind of in a communal setting when that happens. It's very satisfying. So I coming off of my graduate work with Joe Orton, I was interested to see what kind of work were people producing in the 20th century, in the 21st century. I was familiar with a number of the farces that have that were out there, and but especially now, we're in a very different time in the 21st century, and the interest in what are playwrights interested in now, because it's very different. I find I probably read, I don't know, somewhere between, it felt like 50 to 75 farces last summer, and very, very different. Some were excellent, some were good, some not as great. But it's great to get sort of the wide breadth and scope of them, and to see where people's preoccupations are at the moment. So being able to look at kind of farce now is very fascinating.
What do you think It's interesting that you say that the way we're coming at it, the way that we receive it is different than what it was, I guess in that earlier period. What do you think farce brings to contemporary audiences today?
Uh, I like any comedy. I think it's a great way to disarm us in order to reflect back the things that maybe we're uncomfortable talking about. And it presents us with flawed characters. It just puts these flawed characters in heightened situations. And I think there's something about watching people have to struggle but struggle in a situation that is so ridiculous, or at least that one, I think we don't want to find ourselves in. Two, I think it really is a curiosity as to how are they going to get themselves out of this situation. I will say one of the things that, and I have thought about this, it's the last few years, I think have been also tough because particularly sort of in the political spectrum and landscape, we would kind of turn on the TV and things would seem unbelievable to us. Like truth was stranger than fiction. And so finding what are the stories we want to kind of share with audiences that when you turn on the television are just there, you can't top it. You can't write that kind of stuff. So I think there's a catharsis and a certain purge that we get from watching a good farce. I think it offers audiences a way to look at ourselves in a funny, reflective way, and taking serious topics and what happens when we put different types of characters, an ensemble of characters, and bounce them off one another, and how do they encounter their own biases, and how do they encounter their peccadillos and so on. So it's not everyone's cup of tea. I will say that. It's very visceral. It is very physical. I also think that farce, though, speaks a universal language, that inevitably there is something about the genre that everyone can relate to.
David, so it's interesting to hear you talk about it, that you talk about virtuosity. You talk about expert timing. You talk about raising stakes, but you say it in an almost technical sort of way, that the impression that you give is that the training itself needs to be, that this is not for the faint of heart from an acting point of view. You talk about movement and all these things that are in fact trained. How do you, as a professor, because you are a director, you are a researcher, you are also a professor, how do you as a professor introduce comedy, and specifically this style of comedy, into the classroom?
Yeah, it's I've been asked before, can you teach comedy? I think you can. I think part of it is tapping into the individual's kind of own instincts. I think there are techniques that one can use, or one can introduce to the student performer. I can't take credit for this. There's an author named John Wright, a British author, who he's an artistic director of a theater company called Told by an Idiot. And he writes a lot about comedy and clowning, and he introduces this kind of cool circle called the states of tension, and these are just physical states that one can use to interact with comedy. And oftentimes, the fun part is playing one state of tension off of a really crazy situation. So we can be in for example, the state of tension of complete exhaustion. and you have an actor play complete exhaustion or fatigue, and then ask them to do something urgent, and then watch how the actor interacts with that particular situation while being in that particular physical state. Farce-wise, there are these three states of tension. They're kind of toward the end of the circle, and we call them the bomb states. And the first one is there a bomb in the room? And so it's this sense of being pulled towards something, this sense of like looking for something. Where is it? Where's the bomb? Is there a bomb? And oh my God, is there a bomb in the room? You can replace the word bomb with a lot of other things. It's just this idea of searching for something. And there's that urgency and that need to find the bomb. Then the discovery, there is a bomb in the room. That could be opening the door and finding your partner with someone else. It could be opening the door and finding a snake. It could be it could be looking around the corner. It could just be hearing something that someone reveals that stops you in your tracks and causes you to retreat. So we have the passion that accelerates us, and then we have that thing that stops us and actually causes us to move back. The third one is the bomb's about to go off, and the sense of, okay, what are we going to do? Oh no, we got to, in a thriller, it would be, we got to disarm the bomb. We got to stop the bomb. I'm going to push buttons. I'm going to cut wires. In a comedy, it's what are we going to do in this situation? We got to figure out something. We got to improvise something. And that's when we get those irrational choices. That's when people do silly things. And inevitably that last state of tension is rigor mortis, which is, or I call it the top of the world state of tension, where we can't do anything else. So we do that until we end up landing in exhaustion again. There are a couple of other states in there that I didn't talk about, but I think the point is that you can give students techniques. I also teach comic elements, everything from the take to the slow burn to findings to suspensions. And these are things, a lot of them are about putting it into the body. It requires verbal dexterity though, and it requires ensemble, a real sense of ensemble and listening and giving and taking. A great farce, you talk to any actors who do farce, and they'll say to you, it's a team sport. I think that's what also appeals to me, just to go back to an earlier question, is that farce is a team sport. You need, everyone understands what their place is within the storytelling. And if one goes away, I think it crumbles, it falls apart. So it's one of the great ensemble activities, even for farces with two people.
David, this is great. And I appreciate the physical demonstrations as well. Cool. Now that you've told us a little bit about what Farce is and about what your research is, let's take a look at some of the other things that we're doing here at Oakland University in the theater department.
I'm entering my 6th year with the Department of Theater within the School of Music, Theater, and Dance. Without reservation, I am proud to call Oakland University an artistic home. I am grateful for the numerous opportunities I have been given as a professor and as an artist, and feel privileged that I can contribute to the rich culture of SMTD and the greater campus of Oakland University. To see our 4 programs and the department grow and evolve these last 6 years has been amazing. Our BFA in acting, our BFA in musical theater, our BFA in design and technology, and our BA in theater. I'm struck by the hunger in my students, the hunger to be artistically challenged, the hunger to be exposed to new and provocative work, and a hunger to see their stories reflected in the work on stage and to be able to share them with audiences. And I have an awesome faculty. The collegiality that exists between us is amazing. We all get along superbly. We pride ourselves, the department, on being a community, a family. I like to think of our training program as 3-pronged. 1, we are training the artist, providing the skills that enable the student to leave Oakland University having discovered their unique artistic voice as actors, designers, directors, playwrights, and dramaturgs. We're educating the business person. We tell the students all the time they are the CEOs of their own companies. We are training them in the business of the biz, so to speak. How do you market yourself? How do you network? How do you make your own work? And we're training them to be good citizens of the world. Someone who is attentive to the pressing issues around them. They learn compassion, empathy, collaboration. They are someone you can count on, someone who is curious. We are committed to work that is in dialogue with contemporary issues. We are committed as a department to bettering who we are, recognizing our strengths, acknowledging our shortcomings, and in the process, educating ourselves so we can have open, informed, and active conversations about mental health, race, and the future of the theater with both our students and colleagues. We have an excellent study abroad program in Greece, where the students rehearse an original adaptation of a Greek play, perform it there, and bask in the cultural beauty of Hydra. In addition to welcoming talented students from all over Michigan, last year we expanded our recruitment efforts, participating in numerous college audition events around the country. The belief we have in our theater program to be a competitive one on the national stage has seen us expand our recruitment efforts with an eye on bringing top talent from all over the U.S. to Oakland University. This includes our continued efforts to diversify our student population. We are committed to growing the breadth and amounts of our scholarships, not only to entice more students to come and study theater at OU, but to support more travel opportunities, to help provide financial support to students hired in summer stock positions, and to assist our seniors with their senior showcase experience in New York City for the musical theater majors and Chicago for the acting majors. Inevitably, our work doesn't exist and cannot be activated without you and everyone that comes to see our shows. Without our audiences, our supporters, our work lives in a vacuum. So we hope to see you at one of our next shows this coming year and beyond. Now, I'm excited to answer some of those burning questions about Farce or anything else that you've left in the chat. See you in a moment.
Terrific. Thank you, David. We have time now to ask questions of David and Jeremy. Please drop those questions you may have in the Q&A icon, not the chat. And we will do our best to get through all the questions that have been submitted. You guys ready? Let's see what we have here. We have a question here from Liz Katner. I am a Saturday Night Live fan. Do these sketches qualify as farce, or would you consider it another comedy genre? We haven't heard a lot from you yet, Jeremy. Do you want to take that one?
To be out of my area of expertise, I think it depends on which one it is. I think that Professor Graham's description of high stakes and laser focus on the goal would be sort of the defining feature of farce. And so things like the weekend update are not, and the opening monologue are not. But I think that any situation where you have a sketch that starts off, here we are, we're living our everyday lives, and something goes horribly and completely off the rails, and the people on stage are just trying desperately to regain control over their own lives. Anything that fits that bill would be qualified as farce or farcical.
Terrific, thank you.
Right?
Yeah, I would just add to that. Hi, Liz. That in unfortunately, some of the kind of full-length farces that get produced can feel like a sketch, like a sort of like a premise that has been stretched out over two hours. And I think that sketch comedy is sort of its own, I would say its own specific type of genre. But I can say too that we've seen a lot of sketches that have been turned into like feature, I think from Saturday Night Live, like more feature length films.
All the Chevy Chase movies.
There's Chevy Chase movies, maybe even Mike Myers. it's unfortunately, I think we because the studio is so small that it's hard for it to kind of really break out of what it wants to be when it comes to farce. But I think what Jeremy said, and this is an important thing too, is that there are a lot of plays that have farcical elements. Some would not be considered pure farces. We have comedies that are that have farce scenarios in them or situations, but we wouldn't call them all out farces. So I think that, yeah, depending on the sketches, we could there's definitely a farce element to them.
All right, thank you. For either one of you, because you both seem to have a keen knowledge of this, what women are writing farce now, or women writing in the past?
So this is an interesting question, and amidst my research, I haven't come across many. As far as 21st century, so I know I mentioned in the video, Nell Benjamin, who wrote the play The Explorers Club. Nell is the lyricist of Mean Girls, and she's written a number of musicals. Sarah Rule, her play Stage Kiss is a farce. I did mention an Aboriginal playwright, Nakia Louie. She's from Australia. It's interesting because I've asked other artists. One of the byproducts of the pandemic last summer was I got to interview a lot of artists about farce, and they were very happy to talk really about any kind of theater, but particularly it was a joy, I think, for them to talk about something that made people laugh. And that question came up. I said, well, we don't have a lot of female playwrights who are writing farce, and I will say I didn't get any solid answers, and this was even, and whether I was talking to men or women about this, farce is, I would say, traditionally been a white male gaze, in terms of the type of theater that we've gotten. I think we've seen more in the late 20th century, early 21st century, where we've started to see more female playwrights, more BIPOC playwrights taking on the form. My hope is that more will turn their eye to it. I don't have an answer as to why, what it is about the form that hasn't brought more women to write for it. There are, if we go way back, we have Afra Ben, who wrote The Rover as a restoration piece, and here and there we get little known farces that were written, but it's actually part of my research is I want to expand that view, and so when I've encountered new playwrights and their work, and especially female and BIPOC playwrights, I'm kind of pursuing that avenue, because that to me is really interesting, and their point of view and perspective on how to say what they have to say through the genre.
Great, thank you. Jeremy, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I'm going to leave it to the researcher on this.
All right, fair
he,
enough.
He also provides me with most of my contemporary reading lists. You can see his library behind you.
Okay. Here is one that came in anonymously. Are there differences with how farce is written for the theater, television, or the movies? Because of its physical element, does farce ever translate to literature?
So I think that we see farce in those other mediums, and I think we see it more in television because of the sitcom, which is short for situation comedy. So we look at the I think about shows like Modern Family and Frasier and Veep, and shows that they're good. They're good with satire, but then like they'll have like a couple of episodes, with the one when they were on the air, that would use some of those elements I talked about, the miscommunication. Sometimes it's like just people just passing each other doors. I think it's how it's shot, and how it's edited together. I think that's what film and television allows us to do, whereas in the theater, we don't quite get the editing in that way. Movies. I will say that I feel like I haven't seen a lot of farce in movies. I feel like, one of my favorite movies, which I would call a farce, is A Fish Called Wanda. I think that that has all the elements of farce. I am a big Clue fan of the movie Clue, and I think that is a farce. I think it can be hard for some reason on film to translate that physical, visceral energy that we get in the theater. But for some reason it might be like in the sitcom, the way sometimes if it's a three camera sitcom, as opposed to the one camera, it can capture different angles. The novel, I was thinking about the novel, and the one thing about a novel is you got to fill in all the blanks. You got all that description, and you get to know the characters much more, so you become more invested in the characters. Whereas in the theater, we just don't have time. We don't have time to really get, for the most part. Every rule, I think there's an exception, but overall with farce, because of the mechanics of it, we just don't. We don't really get emotionally invested in the characters in a farce. I would also say that in television, we don't want to see our characters change too much, like in a sitcom. We expect the characters to, maybe they have little epiphanies, but then they go back to the way they were, because that's why we love them. I think in literature, in order we can have farcical situations, of course, come up, and an author can definitely elaborate on them. And every once in a while I will, and if you're asking me off the top of my head, do I have a book in mind that is an example? I'd have to think about it a little more. P.G. Wodehouse, who was writing in the early 20th century, he was well known for writing. His books were farces, like the Jeeves and Wooster. I like Christopher Moore. I don't know if for anyone out there who knows Christopher Moore's work, he kind of is akin to another writer I love, Tom Robbins. So different formats, but I think it's still about the pursuit. I think it's still about an obsession, and it's about persisting in that obsession, and then getting to the other side and hopefully living to see another day.
One of the things from a design point of view about farce is that it often happens in one place on the stage. It often happens in one place. You have many doors and other ways for people to get into the space, and so you sort of have a question of where is the next person going to pop out. So there's an energy that goes along with that. The other thing, though, is that we've been talking about raising the stakes all the way through a 2-hour presentation, and one of the ways that farce often does that is it keeps adding characters. More people come into a space, and then they can't leave, and so you have more people in a tight space or running around. And that's something that the theater does particularly well, and that sitcoms also are able to do because of the one set. Whereas the openness of film, I think sometimes sort of winds its way away from that, unless you're talking about something like A Fish Called Wanda or Soap Dish or the Sylvester Stallone movie Oscar, which is a side of Sylvester Stallone that most of us have never seen. It's kind of great.
I think that's I think that point, going back to the pressure cooker, when we put people together and we it's like a little bit like popcorn. We're heating them up and we're watching things kind of do that. I think sometimes in movies, if it's not edited well together, it can deflate and it can take the air out of it, which is why I think that the movie version of Noise is Off, I think is good, but I don't think it truly captures the magic of the stage of the play, because it feels a bit removed from us as an audience, and it's a piece that really lives in the theater.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. We have time for one more question. Why don't you start us off, Jeremy? With our current polarization and sensitivity, has comedy and farce suffered?
I think that lots of things have suffered in the polarization and the inability that we've encountered to listen to one another. I think that comedy is one of the things that has not, for a handful of reasons. One of them being that comedy is a disarming way of pointing out our own failings to ourselves. That whether it's something like the satirical newspaper The Onion or The Daily Show in its many iterations, that on some level we rely on comedy in order to be able to have some of the more important conversations about disinformation, about a nation that is as polarized as it is. That if we try to have that conversation civilly and formally, it falls apart. Whereas being put in a situation where we are there to laugh, we are there to lighten ourselves, it allows us to listen in a different way. Now, whether that's farce or satire or any of the other genres, I think that the world we live in right now is absolutely ripe because of the high stakes, because of the frankly ridiculousness of some of those conversations. And I hope that playwrights and scriptwriters make use of it. Maybe the only way to get through to people.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see what kind of comedies emerge in the next couple of years, coming out of the last 4 or 5 years, from a political standpoint, from the pandemic. What are the stories and what are the comedies that people are going to be putting on stage? I hope we see some good farces. I hope we see some farces that continue to engage directly with discourse that's going on, with the social issues, with the political issues, and finding ways to also have fun with them. I think in the end, I love farce because they encompass so many elements of comedy, of satire and parody, and stand-up and vaudeville and burlesque. Like all of these things tend to, in one form or another, we find them in farce, which is exciting. And I think it's ripe. I think Jeremy's absolutely right. Like it's ripe for something incisive, potentially dark. There's nothing wrong with dark farce. I look at the work of Martin McDonagh, and who has a dastardly sense of humor and often a little violent, but his points are made. His points are made through comedy.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for all that you presented tonight. We're so thankful. It looks like our time for tonight's session of OU Explorations has come to an end. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and the conversation. Thanks to David Graham and Jeremy Barnett for sharing their time and expertise. Before you go, you will have a brief 30-second survey that will pop up, and we hope that you'll take time to complete that. Watch for our next OU Exploration session coming up Thursday, November 17th, featuring Dr. Tandi Sule, presenting on hip hop, racism, inclusive spaces. Thank you for joining us, and good night.